60 Minutes, Rewind.
For the past 35 years, the United States and Iran have been locked in a hostile relationship marked by diplomatic isolation, military threats, and deep mutual mistrust. Then last November, something happened. Amid rising tensions in the Middle East and the possibility of a military attack against Iran's nuclear facilities, the two sides stepped back and signed what amounted to a temporary truce. Iran agreed to freeze development of its nuclear capability, and in exchange, the U.S. and 5 world powers promised Iran some relief from economic sanctions. A permanent deal is still under negotiation. The primary catalyst was the election last year of Iranian President Hassan Rouhani, a reform-minded cleric who won a surprising and convincing victory by promising to improve the economy and end Iran's international isolation. Clearly something is going on in Tehran, and we wanted to see it firsthand. Last month, we were granted visas and packed our bags for an 8-day visit.
The thing that strikes you most about Tehran is that it defies expectation. It's a sprawling, modern city with 12 million people, and most of them are offended by the perceived image of their country as a hostile, backward, dangerous place filled with terrorists. A conservative Islamic police state ruled by a religious theocracy. It's much more complicated than that. Iran is one of the wealthiest, best educated, most sophisticated countries in the Middle East, and most people here are eager to end their political and economic isolation if their government can work out a deal.
There is a lot of misinformation and disinformation about Iran.
Dr. Mohammad Nahavandian speaks from experience, having spent years in the United States getting a PhD in economics from George Washington University. Today, he's chief of staff to President Hassan Rouhani and considered by some to be the second most powerful person in the new government, one that would like America to forget about the rantings of former President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad and try a different approach that does not lead to military confrontation and war.
Now we are opening a new chapter, a chapter of building trust. Now that both sides have recognized that this cannot and should not continue, the best way is to coming to some agreement, and instead of imposing economic sanctions, try to utilize economic relations to overcome political disagreement.
In Iran, Nahavandian and his boss, President Rouhani, are both pragmatic moderates, less concerned about ideology than fixing the sick Iranian economy, which was the mandate from voters. To do it, Rouhani has to ease the economic sanctions that have been imposed by the U.S. and Europe as punishment for pursuing a nuclear program. The country's limited ability to export oil, import goods, and participate in the international banking system are largely responsible for high unemployment and an inflation rate of 30%. What about the sanctions? How difficult is the economy?
He hopes that it gets better while they are negotiating. And he wants things to get cheaper.
While the sanctions and their effects have imposed considerable pain and hardship on many Iranians, we saw no evidence that the economy was on the verge of collapse. The bazaars were filled with goods and people were shopping.
It is serious, but as we said, it hasn't really brought Iran to the knee.
Sayed Fateh and his son Abdullah are part of the business class that President Rouhani is trying to empower by privatizing state-owned industry, increasing competition, and opening up Iran to the world. They say the sanctions have done enough harm to get Iran to the bargaining table, but not enough to force the Iranians into a final deal they don't want to make. Do you think that Iran is willing to make concessions on its nuclear program?
It depends on the concessions, doesn't it? To stop it totally, I doubt it. But to reach some middle grounds, most probably.
The Fatehs gave up a comfortable expatriate lifestyle in the States more than a decade ago to return here and become pioneers in the Iranian internet. Their company, Pars Online, is now one of the country's largest service providers, but not as large as they would like it to be. How do you run an internet company and build an internet company when there are sanctions in place?
everything is possible, but it's just a bit more expensive and a bit longer to bring everything.
You can get practically anything you want.
I'm expecting that the new Google Glass product that's coming out, hopefully, probably within the next month or two, you'll be able to find it in Iran.
In northern Tehran, we found shopping malls that would not be out of place on Rodeo Drive in Beverly Hills. They cater to the country's elite, many who made their fortunes through close ties to the government and even the clergy. We saw French perfume, designer clothes, and brand names like GoPro, Samsung, and Apple. Not far away was a showroom for BMWs and Porsches.
And how does it get here?
Well, I'm sure they have ways to get things in through various borders, I presume.
It was clear Sayed had no interest in discussing the details, and when we asked him about internal opposition to the negotiations with the U.S., his son Abdullah suggested in Farsi that his father not respond.
I mean, there are people in this country and people outside the country who really don't want to see this happen.
Well, no, why not? You do see some newspaper articles or talks, but whether or not that's a reality or not is a different issue.
During our time in Tehran, we were able to travel around without government supervision and free to speak with anyone who would talk to us about what was going on. It wasn't always easy to get answers.
There are many people speak English in Bazaar, but none of them. None of them talks about politics.
You don't want to talk about politics?
No, I don't want to politics.
Nobody wants to talk about politics.
Where are you from?
The United States. What do you think of President Rouhani?
He's better. He's better. That's it.
People in Tehran are very careful about what they say, which makes it difficult to figure out what's going on, even for Iranians. While there is wide popular support for President Rouhani's policies of moderation and engagement, there is also subterranean opposition from hardline rivals who have benefited from the status quo, including powerful forces that are either invisible or inaccessible to Westerners.
One of them is the Revolutionary Guard, Iran's elite military and security force that's charged with protecting the revolution from internal and external threats. But the Guard is more than that. It is a powerful political and economic force with tentacles in industries like construction, telecommunications, and banking.
They can be seen occasionally in uniform marching in patriotic parades, but the Guard operates mostly in secret, a shadowy brotherhood that, among other things, arms and trains Iran's proxy armies like Hezbollah in its fight against Israel. They do not give interviews to Western journalists, but they've been critical of Rouhani in the Iranian press. Other hardliners have held demonstrations that oppose any Iranian concessions in negotiations with the U.S. We asked Mohammad Nahavandian, the president's chief of staff, about it, and he answered very carefully.
The Revolutionary Guard is very much opposed to any kind of a deal, opposed even to the negotiations. True?
I think that generalization is not correct.
You know, my understanding is that this is not necessarily a smooth road for President Rouhani in terms of mustering support on all the things that he wanted to do when he ran for office.
Isn't that the definition of a democratic election?
That seems to be an acknowledgement that there are people here that are giving you a hard time.
The elected president is being accepted and supported by the supreme leader. So the whole system are supporting the elected president. And that is the case.
The story will continue after this.
President Rouhani was elected to run the Iranian government, but it's his boss, the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, who actually runs the country and has the last word. He doesn't give interviews to Western journalists either, but he has no problem communicating with his followers through state-run media and the local mosques. If you want to know what's on the Ayatollah's mind, and we did, you can go to places like Shar Areh, a religiously conservative working-class suburb on the southern outskirts of Tehran. We were there during and after Friday prayers, and our presence caused quite a stir.
Where are you from?
We're from the United States.
What?
From America.
America.
What's your country?
America.
America. America?
Yes.
Oh my God.
What, you've never seen an American?
No.
No? No?
No.
We're journalists.
Word spread quickly, and within a few minutes we were surrounded by a crowd of people eager to share 3 decades worth of pent-up feelings about the United States, as told to them by the Supreme Leader.
The negotiating is good. But what is bad is that America is doing very bad things. After negotiating, Obama is telling the option of army is on the table. It is not a good thing.
What we want is not to impose anything to us. Nothing should be imposed by the U.S. to us. This lady also is saying that our Supreme Leader said to the government people that go and make peace and make that agreement. But I'm not very optimistic about this U.S. policies.
We listened to their now familiar grievances, beginning in 1953, when a U.S.-backed coup brought down a popular Democratic government and replaced it with the dreaded Shah. All the way into the 1980s and the bloody 8-year war with Iraq, in which the U.S. favored Saddam Hussein.
Starting from foreign policy, you cannot find friends in Iran. But if you start from economics, from technological cooperation, from cultural relations, there can be some common ground.
The people in the United States also have grievances. Certainly the hostage crisis, supporting some groups like Hezbollah that the U.S. considers to be terrorist groups, the refusal to acknowledge Israel's right for existence, are all issues of importance to American foreign policy.
For so long, those points of disagreement has been the focus of all the attention. Of course, there are some points of disagreement. You don't negotiate if you do not have disagreements. You negotiate to turn disagreements to agreements.
Right now, those disagreements are scattered across the desert hundreds of miles from Tehran, where for decades, Iranians have been aggressively developing a nuclear program they insist is for peaceful purposes, all the while acquiring the technology to enrich uranium to bomb-grade quality.
There are people in the international community and scientists in the United States who say there would only be one reason why Iran would have all these centrifuges, and that would be to build a nuclear device.
It was not. For Iran, it was just another example of technological advancement. But when this was faced by military threats, people took it as an issue of national pride.
Scientific accomplishments are a huge part of Iran's self-image. In spite of its isolation, it has launched a satellite and cloned a goat. Just a few days ago, the Ayatollah unveiled Iran's own copy of a U.S. surveillance drone. But for whatever it's worth, no one we talk to in Tehran believes the country wants to build a nuclear bomb.
How do they feel about nuclear weapons?
There are no nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons are forbidden.
They say it's all spelled out on the Ayatollah's website. But there's no shortage of skeptics, which include Israel, Saudi Arabia, and members of Congress who would like very much to scuttle any deal.
This is a tricky negotiation.
Yes.
There's some political risk involved on both sides.
You are exactly right on that. Because for all these long years of distance and not having a positive and constructive dialogue, there has been a lot of suspicion. So both sides, because of that suspicion, have a hard time convincing others. But that is the nature of diplomacy.
The White House has said there's only a 50-50 chance that the negotiations will succeed. But whatever happens, this will be remembered as a moment of opportunity, lost or seized, the first one in a long time. And most people in Tehran seem ready to take the chance.